I know I should probably keep this quiet, but I can't. This story, my story, needs to be outside of me. It needs witnesses. It happened just before the major winter holidays, and even now, months later, the memory of that day is a cold, tight knot right in the center of my chest. I am Elias Vance. I just turned 24, and I've been building my life from the ground up since I walked out the door that day. You need to understand exactly how I ended up standing ankle deep in freezing mud, watching my entire family turn their backs on me from the warmth of the living room. To get the full picture, we have to start with my grandmother, Alara. Not my mother, Corinne, but Alara. She's the one who was my foundation. From the time I was 6 until I was 16, she was my stability. My mother was in motion. She called it her spiritual journey, her quest for self-discovery. We all knew what it meant. A rotating cast of transient men, a series of short-lived, low-paying jobs 3 towns over, and a deep, systemic inability to handle the ordinary responsibilities of life. Alara didn't sigh. She didn't complain. She just absorbed the shock and did the work. Alara taught me how to read blueprints for simple repairs, how to balance a budget down to the penny, and how to look a person in the eye and hold myself accountable. She instilled in me a kind of ferocious self-reliance that felt less like a virtue and more like a necessary survival tool. I loved her with a quiet, bottomless gratitude. She was a mountain. When I was 16, Corinne decided her journey was complete and that she was ready to resume the role of a mother. I moved back into her small, cramped house in Ardenwood. Alara lived only 2 blocks away, and I was at her house every single day after school. The move coincided with the arrival of my 2 half-sisters, Chloe and Lila. They were 6 and 4 when I returned. Different fathers, both gone before the girls even learned to walk. From that day on, I was the 3rd parent. Corinne worked grueling, erratic shifts at a regional distribution center. I was the one who woke Chloe and Lila, made them the same 2 variations of toast and scrambled eggs every morning, ensured their homework was done, and took them to the dusty, worn-out park on Saturdays. I didn't resent it. They were my sisters. They were innocent and funny and exhausting, and I loved them unconditionally. They were my family, maybe more than Corinne was. As soon as I turned 18, I secured a demanding full-time job at a shipping facility and enrolled in online community college courses. I was determined to leave, but I knew I couldn't just abandon my sisters. So I started building a financial fortress around them. I paid Corinne rent, often covering her share of groceries. More importantly, I put all the critical utilities, the gas, the electricity, the water, and the internet, into my name. Corinne's credit was permanently scorched from 2 prior evictions and a string of unpaid collections. The companies wouldn't touch her. I knew the risk, but what choice did I have? I wasn't going to let Chloe and Lila shiver through a winter night or go without running water because of Corinne's instability. Most months, Corinne contributed her share. Sometimes she was short. Sometimes she simply forgot. But the bills were always paid because they were my name, and my name meant something. I was a silent, unpaid insurer of their home life. Then, 8 months ago, Mick slouched into our lives. Corinne met him at a dive bar across the county line. He was 42, perpetually smelling of stale smoke and cheap beer, with a swagger that was meant to convey strength but just broadcasted insecurity. 3 weeks after meeting, he moved into our already crowded house. Mick worked, occasionally, as a day laborer on construction sites, but mostly he just occupied space. From the first handshake, it was clear he hated me. He saw me, the diligent, financially stable, responsible 24-year-old, as a threat to his new kingdom. He started calling me a house leech, a freeloader, telling me I need to grow up and get out. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I was the one paying for his hot showers and his football on the cable I paid for. Corinne changed around him. She went from being merely neglectful to actively toxic. The quiet life she'd maintained for 2 years crumbled. She started drinking heavily again, chain smoking on the porch, and her focus on the girls' needs evaporated. The homework check stopped. The arguments started. When I visited Alara, she noted the regression with weary familiarity. Corinne is making the same choices, Elias, she'd say, stirring her coffee. choosing the man over her children. But she's an adult. It's not my place to interfere. Alara, the mountain, had decided to stand back and watch the landslide. Mick's control became palpable. He moved my favorite reading chair to the curb. He threw out my old boxing gloves, claiming they smelled. He rearranged the entire living room to suit his football viewing habits. I bit my tongue until it bled. I kept quiet for the sake of Chloe and Lila, who were already jumpy and withdrawn. I just kept reminding myself, asterisk, it's temporary. It has to be temporary. Asterisk. 6 weeks before the Harvest Day feast, Mick ratcheted up the pressure. He'd bring up my living situation at the dinner table, in front of the girls, launching into monologues about how I was clogging up the house, how I needed to be a man and establish my own place. Corinne would just stare at her plate, silent, smoking. Chloe and Lila would look at me with wide, fearful eyes, and I'd just offer a tight smile and say, "Everything is fine, girls. Don't worry about it." But I was preparing. I wasn't blind. I saw the wall closing in. I secured a tiny one-bedroom apartment across town, signed a lease, and quietly began the great escape. Every night, after Corinne and Mick were asleep, I moved the essentials, my external hard drive, my university textbooks, my important financial documents, the 3 good winter coats I owned. I left behind the bulk, the bedding, the mismatched furniture, the old clothes, the superficial evidence that Elias Vance still lived at home. I told no one, not even Alara. I just waited for the inevitable explosion. The Harvest Day feast arrived with a cold, damp stillness. The air in Ardenwood was heavy with the smell of wet leaves and coming snow. I'd been up since dawn, the only one moving in the kitchen. I stuffed the turkey, prepared Alara's famous savory stuffing, and had the potatoes boiling. Corinne had invited Alara over, a hollow tradition we maintained every year. Chloe and Lila were buzzing with pre-holiday energy, helping me set the good china, the chip plates we only use once a year, on the dining table. Mick was already entrenched in the living room, beer in hand, screaming incoherent instructions at a football team on the television. It was 2 in the afternoon. I was vigorously mashing potatoes, feeling the rhythmic tension release in my shoulders when Mick invaded the kitchen. He didn't preface it. He just stood in the doorway, blocking the light, and delivered the ultimatum. Corinne and I talked. After the holidays, you're out. You need to be gone. It's time. I paused mashing. I had a small, private moment of cold triumph. Asterisk, I knew it. I'm already ready. Asterisk. Understood, I said, keeping my voice flat and neutral. I'll look for a place immediately. That should have been the end of it. The polite, agreed-upon fiction. But Mick didn't want a smooth transition. He wanted a performance. He wanted a victory lap. Look for a place? You should have done that years ago, you parasitic anchor, he sneered, leaning against the counter. You've been a burden on Corinne for too long. Never contributed enough. She deserves a clean slate, a household without an adult man-child sucking the life out of her budget. I set the masher down, deliberately, cleanly. The sound was a sharp clank on the counter. I think you'll find my name is on the electric, the gas, the water, and the internet. I reminded him, my eyes locking onto his. I pay half the groceries. You contributed exactly 0 to the household budget since you moved in, Mick. Who's the burden exactly? Mick's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. This isn't your house. You're just a guest who overstayed his welcome, a perpetual dependent. Corinne walked in then, pulling a fresh cigarette from a crumpled pack. I looked past Mick to her. This was the moment, the critical junction, the chance for her to redeem even a fraction of her motherhood. Corinne, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Is this what you want? Do you want me gone today? She avoided my gaze. She lit the cigarette with a shaky hand, inhaled deeply, and exhaled a plume of gray smoke towards the ceiling. Her voice was thin, reedy, barely audible above the television noise. Mick has a point, Elias. You're 24. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. That was it. The final, definitive cut. It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was a cold, pure clarity. The understanding of who Corinne truly was. A perpetual teenager who would prioritize her temporary comfort and her abusive partner's validation over the well-being of her adult son, who had been propping up her life. Fine, I stated. I didn't raise my voice. I'll pack. I'll be out today. Before the feast. Mick let out a barking, triumphant laugh. Good. Get your trash out of here. Maybe now Corinne can finally focus on her real family. Real family. The term echoed in the sudden silence, a raw, exposed nerve. He was referring to Chloe and Lila, the children I had essentially raised, while he had been nowhere, and Corinne had been out finding herself. I turned and walked to my room, grabbing 3 large, heavy-duty garbage bags. I didn't fold anything. I didn't sort. I just swept every remaining item into bags. Shoes, old t-shirts, worn jeans, toiletries. The casual, everyday items I hadn't yet managed to move to my apartment. I didn't care if they were ruined. My focus was surgical. Leave. Now. From the living room, I could hear Mick gloating to Corinne about her courage and how they didn't need dead weight. Chloe and Lila appear at my door, their small faces streaked with tears. Ellie, where you going? Is it because of us? Chloe sobbed, her little shoulders shaking. I dropped the garbage bag and knelt down, pulling them both into a fierce hug. Never, sweethearts. Never because of you. I have to leave, but I promise, this has nothing to do with you. I love you both. I carried the 3 bulging bags out to the living room. Mick was standing by the front door, his stance proprietary and confrontational. Let me help you move faster, parasite, he snarled, snatching 2 of the bags before I could react. He flung the front door open, walked onto the porch, and hurled both bags off the side, into the wet, neglected yard. It had rained heavily the previous night. The side yard was a soup of black mud, wet mulch, and decaying autumn leaves. My clothes, my last physical connections to that house, exploded from the ripped bags, scattering across the filth. I followed him out. Mick was grinning, a truly ugly, satisfied leer. He walked back in, grabbed the 3rd bag, and threw it onto pile. Then he delivered the final, calculated blow. Your own father ran off because you're worthless. Boy. Now I see why. Guess bad blood runs in the family. I stopped breathing. Worthless. I stood there, looking at my possessions being absorbed by the mud. The biting cold air was suddenly irrelevant. Across the street, the curtains in Mr. Harrison's front window twitched. Everyone in Ardenwood would know by tomorrow morning. Corinne appeared on the porch, a cigarette dangling from her lips. Alara was right behind her. I looked at Alara, that last, desperate plea for intervention in my eyes. The mountain. She just stood there, arms crossed over her chest, her face utterly blank. Silent. Corinne inhaled on her cigarette, refusing to meet my eyes. Chloe and Lila were pressed against the front window, their faces distorted by the glass, tears streaming down their cheeks. Mick placed a possessive arm around Corinne's waist, looking every inch the proud conqueror. I picked up the bags, shaking the heaviest clumps of mud and debris off my shirts. I looked at Corinne one last time, my eyes conveying everything I couldn't say. I love you, Corinne. Remember that. She flinched, a tiny, involuntary movement, but she said nothing. Mick told me to get out. I started walking, the 3 garbage bags, now heavy with water and mud, slung over my shoulder. The nearest bus stop was 3 miles away. I walked the entire way down the shoulder of the highway on the day of the harvest feast, carrying wet bags of muddy clothing, looking like a man who had completely lost his footing. I didn't care. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a core of focused, absolute resolve. They wanted me gone? Fine. I was gone. I spent the night in my new, small, quiet apartment, ordering cheap delivery pizza and making lists of things I needed, things I had to replace, and most importantly, lists of what needed to happen next. I wasn't sad anymore. I was cold. I was focused. And I was absolutely certain of the next steps. The very next day, a Friday, I went to utility companies. Every single one of them, electric, gas, water, internet. I presented my ID, showed them my new apartment lease, and requested immediate service transfers. I paid the final balances for the old address and initiated new contracts at my new address. It was all perfectly legal. It was all my right. The accounts were in my name. I scheduled the disconnections for late December, giving them the required 30 days notice. I didn't tell Corinne. I didn't tell Alara. I just set the gears in motion and waited. The winter holidays came and went. I worked. I studied. I spent the time alone in the quiet of my apartment. On Christmas Eve, Lila managed to text me from a borrowed phone, asking where I was, saying she missed me. That text, a selfie of her and Chloe in front of a sparse, artificial tree, trying to smile but failing, almost shattered my resolve. But I stayed focused. I had to. Late December arrived. The utilities were cut. Exactly 2 days later, my phone started ringing. It was Corinne's number. I let it ring. 6 calls that first day. Then texts began flooding in. Asterisk, why is the power off? Why is the internet down? The water stopped working. Asterisk. I didn't reply. Mick called next. He left a message, an aggressive, sputtering demand that I fix whatever petty thing I'd done. I deleted the message mid-sentence. More calls. More texts. Corinne's messages were becoming frantic. The utility companies told her the account holder had transferred the services. She demanded I call them back. Then Alara called. Her voice was taut with control fury. Corinne is here, with the girls. They have no heat or water. Elias, what in God's name did you do? I told her exactly what I had done. I transferred the utilities that were in my name to my new address, just like any person who moves out would do. You're being cruel, she hissed. Those little girls are suffering. What about them? Maybe Corinne should have thought about them before she let her boyfriend throw my possessions into the mud on the Harvest Day feast. I shot back, the words sharp and clean. Alara went silent. The long, heavy silence of a truth she couldn't dispute. You need to grow up, Elias, she finally said, and hung up. I blocked all their numbers. I wasn't going to be the central villain in their self-pitying drama. They wanted me gone. I was gone. They wanted nothing from me. They got nothing from me. 61 days after I walked away, I received a message request on social media from an unfamiliar profile. It was Corinne. She clearly created a new account to bypass the blocks. The message read, asked us, how did you do this? Undo it, please. We can't survive this. Whatever you did, stop it now. I am your mother. Please make it end. Asterisk. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I screenshotted the message, saved it to a folder labeled Evidence, and went back to watching a movie. They had their wish. Now they were finally learning the terrifying scope of how much I had actually been holding their lives together. Corinne refused to surrender. 3 days after the social media message, the aggressive, rhythmic pounding on my apartment door started at 6 a.m. I looked through the peephole. Corinne, looking haggard and unkempt, was outside, with Mick standing aggressively behind her. I opened the door just enough to engage the chain lock. Corinne launched into a frantic tirade. We had to discuss the situation. I couldn't leave them without services. The girls were suffering. I transferred services in my name to my new residence, Corinne. I repeated the mechanical truth. The companies would not work with you or Mick because of your prior history. If you want utilities there, one of you needs to establish new service. Corinne cried out, but you knew that would leave us with nothing. You did this to hurt us. Yes, I did it on purpose, I agreed, staring directly at Mick, who looked ready to smash the door in. Just like Mick purposely threw my belongings into the mud. Just like you purposely stood there smoking and watching it happen. Mick surged forward. Stop being a little punk, Vance, and call the companies. Put the power back on. I can't, I stated. They're contracted to this apartment now. You want utilities? Get them in your name. Mick explained like I was a simpleton that he'd tried, but they demanded a deposit he didn't possess. Corinne confirmed her own attempts failed due to her credit flag. They needed me to call and reverse the transfer. Why would I do that? I asked. Mick sputtered, searching for a lever. Because we're family. Because Corinne raised you. You owe her. I looked at Corinne. searching for any sign of shame. Nothing. She couldn't meet my eyes. No, I said. Just a flat, definitive syllable. Asterisco no. Corinne started sobbing, claiming I was destroying them. They couldn't stay at Alera's house much longer. The girls needed stability. Maybe you should have thought about stability before choosing him over your son. I advised. I locked the chain, closed the door, and walked away from their frustrated pounding and yelling. 2 days later, I met Corinne at a coffee shop. She looked like a ghost. She immediately launched into a string of excuses. Mick was stressed, struggling. He'd been drinking. He didn't mean it. She said she'd been caught off guard. She said the girls missed me terribly. I allowed her to finish. Then I asked the pivotal question. Corinne, what specifically do you want from me? The utility's back on. We can't get an apartment without proof of service. We can't stay with Alera. Elias, I need you to fix this. You have the credit. They'll work with you. And what is Mick planning to do? I asked, is he going to apologize for calling me worthless? For throwing my clothes in the mud? Corinne became visibly uncomfortable. Mick has his pride. He feels badly about it, I'm sure. So that's a no. She then tried the final toxic maneuver. Couldn't you just be the bigger person, Elias? For the sake of the holidays. Be the bigger person. The bigger person. As if I were the perpetrator who needed to rise above the mistake I had caused. I told her I would think about it, left cash for my untouched coffee, and walked out. Alera called a week later. Corinne, Mick, Chloe, and Lila had officially moved into her already small home. Alera was furious. You created this mess. Elias, you have to fix it. Those girls don't deserve this. You are vindictive and cruel. I laid down the boundary. I moved out Alera. I stopped funding the life that allowed Mick to abuse me. I simply stopped enabling. This isn't my mess to fix. This is Corinne's choice. She then started reciting Corinne's revised history, how difficult I was as a child, how strained our relationship was, how Mick was just trying to protect Corinne from my constant judgment. This confirmed my suspicion. Mick, the parasite, had been systematically isolating Corinne. He wanted her completely dependent on him, financially and emotionally. My presence, my name on the accounts, my job, and my apartment represented a pathway out for her, and he couldn't abide that. He needed me gone so he could fully control her, and Corinne was buying into the narrative that she was the victim of my vindictiveness. I explained my theory to Alera. She dismissed it as paranoid. She hung up. A few days later, Corinne contacted me with a new emergency. Alera had given them 30 days' notice. They had nowhere to go. They were going to be homeless. Then came the final, shocking escalation. Corinne showed up at my workplace, the sterile, secured lobby of the shipping facility. My supervisor looked uneasy as she was escorted back to me. She was thinner, shaking, her clothes hanging loose. She said Alera was serious. They were running out of time. Shane was rejected from every apartment application. The girls were acting out in school. Chloe had been suspended for a fight. Lila was wetting the bed again. Where is Mick right now? I demanded. He's out looking at a trailer park, she stammered. Or is he at a bar? I asked. She started crying right there in the lobby. She confessed that she knew she'd made mistakes. She begged me to help for the girl's sake. You can come back home. Elias, we can work it out. We'll be a family again. I looked at her, at the raw desperation, and delivered my final refusal. There's no going back, Corinne. You made your choice on the Harvest Day feast. You have to live with it. Security had to escort her from the premises. That night, Mick was waiting for me on the staircase of my new apartment building. He stood up, blocking my path, demanding we talk man to man. He called me a destroyer of his family, a coward, a punk hiding behind my job and money. He said I was being petty, punishing him for one mistake. I asked him simple questions. Was he employed full-time? Had he saved for a deposit? Had he apologized to Corinne for getting them into this situation? His answers were a stunning display of entitlement and evasion. He was not responsible. I had destroyed the family. One more time, Mick. Move, or I'm calling the police for trespassing. He backed away, spitting a final insult. I'd never be a man. I was hiding. The social worker's deadline was closing in. I lay awake, the image of Chloe and Lila, scared and confused, eating at my conscience. I was maintaining the boundary, but my sisters were bearing the cost. 2 weeks later, Elara locked Corinne and Mick out of her house, putting their remaining possessions on the curb. Corinne called, asking if they could stay with me. I didn't respond. The audacity of the request was staggering, but the thought of my sisters sleeping in a vehicle twisted a knife in my gut. The next day, I ran into Mr. Harrison, the neighbor from across the street, at the grocery store. He informed me that Corinne, Mick, and the girls were now living out of Mick's beat-up pickup truck, parked down the street from the abandoned house. They had blankets hung up for privacy. He said someone had called the authorities. I drove past the old house. The truck was there, a dark, lonely presence. I could see the outline of the girls doing homework in the back seat. In February. That night, Corinne called. A social worker, Ms. Chavez, had intervened. They were given 7 days to secure stable housing, or Chloe and Lila would be removed and placed in foster care. 7 days. I called Corinne back. I made a final offer, a nuclear boundary. I will co-sign for an apartment, Corinne. I will pay the deposits. I will help you get utilities established, but only for you and the girls. Mick is out. You choose, Corinne, your boyfriend or your children. Now. She was silent. Then she asked, "What about Mick?" "He has nowhere to go. I can't abandon him. I don't care what Mick does. He's a grown man who threw my life in the mud. He can figure it out. You have until the end of the day." 3 hours later, Mick called me. Not Corinne. Meek. He demanded a meeting. I agreed, meeting him at a busy pizza place. Mick launched into a victim narrative. He claimed I was using my money to control and punish him for one mistake. He was trying to build a family. I was destroying it. I told him Thanksgiving wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Then he played his ultimate card. He claimed Corinne had told him all about how difficult I was as a child, how I was disrespectful, how she needed a break. When she sent me to Elara, she'd rewritten history. She hadn't left me to chase men. She'd exiled me because I was a problem child. I stood up. "We're done." He grabbed my wrist, demanding I sit down. I yanked free. "You walk away, Vance, and you lose your sister forever," he threatened. "If they get taken by CPS because Corinne chose a deadbeat over her children, that fault is on you too," I said. I left him there, shouting that I was destroying a family. I called Corinne and confronted her about the revised history. She stammered, claiming Mick had misunderstood the context. She was still choosing him. The manipulation had won. The social worker's deadline was 2 days away. The day before the deadline, Ms. Chavez called me. I was still listed as an emergency contact. She asked if I would consider kinship placement. If I was willing and able, Chloe and Lila could be placed with me instead of going into the foster care system. I drove around, wrestling with the ethical monstrosity of the situation. Taking them meant sacrificing my own stability, my quiet freedom, my one-bedroom apartment. It meant becoming a single parent at 24 to 2 traumatized children. But the alternative, foster care, was unthinkable. That night, Corinne called me, distraught, knowing the clock was ticking. She said she tried to leave Mick, but he'd threatened her, saying he'd ensure everyone knew she was an unfit mother who had abandoned him. He had flipped the abandonment script entirely. She begged me to take the girls, to save them from strangers. I told her my terms. I would take them, but she had to agree to zero interference, 0 attempts to guilt me, and complete acceptance that this was for Chloe and Lila, not a backdoor rescue for her and Mick. She agreed to everything. The next afternoon, Miss Chavez called. The girls were at the social services office. "Come get your sisters." I drove downtown. Corinne was there, looking ravaged. Chloe and Lila, clutching small, cheap backpacks, looked terrified. I signed a stack of papers and was named temporary kinship guardian. When Miss Chavez said they were leaving with me, the girls bolted into my arms. Lila was sobbing into my shirt. Chloe was desperately clinging to my waist. Corinne stood up, attempting a final maternal gesture. I stepped between them, shielding my sisters. You need to arrange supervised visits through Miss Chavez's office, Corinne, once you have stable housing. She started crying harder, apologizing, saying she never meant for any of this to happen. I know you didn't mean it, Corinne. I said, the word's quiet and devastating. That's the problem. You never mean anything. I took the girls' hands and led them out. Mick was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. He saw us. He started moving toward us. I put the girls behind me. This is what you wanted all along, wasn't it? Vance? To steal her children? To destroy my family? He screamed, his face contorted. Ms. Chavez, who had followed us out, stepped in front of him and ordered him to leave the property. He ignored her, advancing toward my car, yelling that I had ruined everything out of spite. I locked Chloe and Lila safely inside. Mick came up to the window, banging on the glass, yelling threats that I'd regret this. Security finally arrived and escorted him back to his truck. The drive home was quiet. Chloe and Lila sat in the back, holding hands. When we got to my apartment, I showed them the small spaces I cleared. Lila, the 8-year-old, asked the question that defines the story. Are we going to live with you forever now, Ellie? For now, sweetie, I said, until Corinne figures things out. Chloe, the 10-year-old, then whispered, Is Mick coming with Corinne when she figures things out? I don't know, I replied. Good, she said, her voice small but firm. He was mean to you, and he made Corinne cry. It has been 3 months. The complexity and the cost are immense. I moved us to a 2-bedroom apartment immediately. The rent is a heavy weight, but my job is secure. The girls are enrolled in a new school. We are building a fragile new stability. Lila still wakes up with nightmares. Chloe has moments of deep, quiet withdrawal, but they are safe. They have a warm bed, food in the fridge, and someone who puts them first. Corinne is called twice, both times via Ms. Chavez's office. She wants visits. Ms. Chavez requires stable housing first. Corinne, as far as I know, is still choosing Mick. She is still in the truck. She's objecting to the visitation requirement that bans Mick, claiming they are a package deal. Ms. Chavez told her to prioritize her daughters. Ilara called me once. You won. Elias. Are you happy now? I didn't want to win, Ilara. I told her. I wanted my family to act like family. That ship sailed when you and Corinne stood silent and watched me get humiliated. She hung up. I retained guardianship for at least 6 months. The court dates are endless. The stress is monumental. I am 24 years old, raising 2 children because my mother chose her abusive boyfriend over her own flesh and blood. But my vision is surgically clear now. I see Corinne for what she is, a perpetual dependent who expects others to bear the consequences of her disastrous choices. I see Mick for controlling parasite who destroyed the last fragments of our family. And I see Ilara for the enabler who valued non-interference over principle. And I see myself. I am tired. I am stressed. I'm still angry. But I sleep soundly because I did the right thing. I drew a line. I upheld a boundary. I refused to reward toxic, damaging behavior. And when the time came, I protected my sisters when no one else would. Lila got an A on her last science test. Chloe made me laugh until my stomach hurt last night at dinner. They asked me again yesterday if Corinne loves them. Yes, she loves you. I said, try and find a delicate, honest balance. She's just not good at making the right choices. Chloe then asked a question I still can't answer. Does she love Mick more than us? I settled on the truth for an adult, simplified for a child. Sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt the people they love most. And we have to be strong enough to deal with the results. I told Corinne, standing in the mud that cold day, I love you. Remember that. I meant it. I still mean it. But love does not mean enabling. It doesn't mean sacrificing safety for the illusion of family. It means protecting the innocent. Corinne made her choices. Mick made his. Ilara made hers. And I made mine. I chose my sisters. I chose my self-respect. I chose to stop the cycle of enabling. And that, finally, is the only choice that matters.